Inside Whitehall with me, James Starkey.
I mean, you're the guys.
Well, there's quite a lot to cover because we had both of us had a week off, going to see our friends on the continent. As both, I think me and Jonathan, one thing we would subscribe to is we might not like the EU, but we still like Europe, which people often forget is a landmass rather than a political institution. But anyway, we both had a lovely time in France, although I hasten to add, not together. We were in very separate parts of the country. We came back this week. We'll cover today. There's yet more Mandelson revelations, which I think the pages that have been given to Parliament run to around 1,000 pages. So there'll be stories this evening as we speak on Monday afternoon into tomorrow's papers and across the media, I suspect. But it's one that I imagine people will be picking through and cross-referencing with past events in the coming days, and so we could be getting more of that right through to the weekend. It would be my guess. Then we've got Jonathan has been up to Makerfield, and I think he's going back there again soon with his reform colleagues, and has a bit of what's going on the ground. I think there's some conflicting messages between the polling, some of the stuff we've seen on social media, and so really interested to hear what Jonathan's actually seen. Someone who's been out knocking doors, speaking to people in the area. And then we'll take a look at is he Labour's forgotten man already? Wes Streeting hesitated over resigning. All the talk is now about Burnham. Has had two what politicians like to call interventions in the past few days to try and put himself back in the headlines. But I'll kind of have a quick look at is Wes Streeting already yesterday's man? Could he disappear off into the past? But first, Jonathan, the story that keeps on giving, or not, if you're Keir Starmer, we've got more revelations today. More, I think, 1,000 pages is currently being, given to based on the parliamentary website as the humble address that was supported by the cross party a few months ago. This is the latest tranche. We've had some already, but for context, I think it's about three times more at once than we've had so far. So we're getting a lot of stuff today. They can't get away from it, can they?
No, they can't get away from it. And look, I think in some ways, Keir Starmer is thinking now just dump as much as possible in the hope that when there's almost too much being dropped off, that maybe it will pass by people certain things. I think the fact there's been the briefing into the newspapers that there's going to be lots of embarrassing exchanges, lots of ministers looking like they're fawning over Peter Mandelson a bit. Peter Mandelson injecting himself into things well beyond his brief as ambassador. I think is, let's just say, it's laying the groundwork. Let's be perfectly frank. There's also some ideas that there are some messages that have not been returned from some ministers, or indeed some messages that are deleted, and we'll never know what was in those, or certainly not for now. Anyhow, either way, it's going to be another couple of days of embarrassing headlines for Labour and we'll go against the idea, I think, that Labour MPs are trying to distance themselves from Peter Mandelson and make out that they never really were close to him. Ultimately, it's going to show he was part of the New Labour institution. He was up there with Blair and Brown in terms of the big beast of New Labour, and the Labour Party were excited and giddy to have him around, was the ultimate truth of it. And I think that they just can't get away from it. And not exactly great for the Makerfield by-election, where, look, Andy Burnham seems to not have had, to his credit, a close relationship with Peter Mandelson. But I suspect he'll have to answer some questions about how he feels about some people who were getting excited, and ultimately whether or not he would have them maybe in any cabinet if he were indeed ever to become prime minister.
Yeah, it's something that it ultimately has probably been a big part in what will end up being Keir Starmer's downfall, and something that, while he is prime minister, just seems totally unable to get away from. And I think the problem with the interesting thing, if we go back to the original Epstein files, um, it's a kind of, I think maybe this is a relatively new thing that we've not seen these kind of files publicly sourced, people being able to go through them, because what we see is a lot of the journalists and actually just individual citizens are able to go through and kind of cross-reference. Well, if you ask that at that time, what does that mean? This meeting also occurred at the same time, and so. Yeah, as we saw with I don't think when we saw the story of the Epstein files coming over from the United States, there was the knowledge that it might include some issues for UK politicians, but that's been the biggest blowback. It's led to the downfall of two of the most significant figures in British society politics for 2 decades, a prince of the realm and a dark prince of the realm. Both really losing their careers over it.
Exactly. And I think that it's just, I think the person probably most worried in part would be Wes Streeting, who I know his team has said he's already shared the messages. He's got nothing to hide, but I mean, we're about to find out how
But we're
true or
led to
indeed.
believe he's probably going to be on certain WhatsApp groups, whether or not he said anything on those. But I think there was always a suspicion in Westminster, and I'll put this delicately, that what was revealed was at least to some degree selective. You could argue, oh, it's not up to me to deliver the release in the group, but let's see what else is in there for Wes, because he is known in Labour circles to have had a relatively strong relationship, certainly when you compare it to someone like Andy Burnham,
Yeah.
Peter Anderson, and many other MPs. And there were these dinners at another Labour figure's house, which I understand they both attended fairly regularly. And I think it's something that if he does run if there is a leadership contest, which I think we both think there will be, and he does run and doesn't make a deal quickly with Andy Burnham, then I suspect a lot of this will come out. That would be a motivation for him to maybe think about whether because he's not going to beat Burnham, so why take all the hits to go with the leadership contest?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We've seen, as you say, Wes do now two interventions. I think the equalising capital gains tax with income tax, so his version of a wealth tax, and then on the other hand, I think I can't remember the other. Obviously, the essay was the other one, wasn't it? Sitting out his
Yes.
issue about inequality, which both he and Burnham both talked about inequality. Blair, the essay, sorry, for those who aren't sure, is a response to Tony Blair's 5,500 word very detailed and actually pretty comprehensive essay. Ironically, actually, in those on the centre right of British politics, there's a lot that Tony Blair said that we probably actually agree with, in the sense of needing to drill in the North Sea and need to take
Mm.
immigration seriously. However, you and I both noted, James, that there a lot of what Blair did, whether that be through quangos, whether that be through reducing powers through the Equality Act or Human Rights Act and giving that to the judiciary instead of ministers, that kind of was all skirted around. And I think Danny Kruger, to be fair, has actually been slowly starting to release more and more detail about sort of reform's position on preparing for government and what it'll do. It's going as far to say that there will be a lot of political appointments in placing current senior civil servants and actually having I think an idea was reached a long time ago, a shared office where all ministers from all departments will be based rather than in their own ministries in order to not let them become captured by groupthink within their own departments, but also to improve collaboration between ministers across departments without having those weird, as you've seen, James, from your experience and my limited one I saw as well, these weird sort of silos that we all end up in government
But going back
departments.
to Wes, I mean, we're going to do a bit later, but it probably makes sense to talk about it now in the context of the kind of labour issues around Mandelson and so on. I mean, so there's been some chatter, and I can't remember which station. I was listening to the radio this morning, and one of the presenters said, "Is Wes now a bit yesterday's man?" He's kind of had this essay that replied to Blair's, which because Burnham had done it, and I think I haven't really seen any coverage of it. I think he's had or he's doing a speech today, which sounds particularly around the NHS, which is a bit like he's pretending he's still the health secretary. Um, it is his old brief, but he's not running for that now, so that's kind of interesting. But I think, look, my take: we had the local elections; they were really bad for Labour. That was clearly the tipping point for a lot in Labour in terms of Starmer. I think we'd had Mandels in a couple of weeks before, but it was clear no one was going to move for Starmer. We discussed it on this podcast. No one was going to move for Starmer until we had the locals. They were bad. But Wes basically, it took a week or over a week for Wes to resign. it was pretty obvious he had, allies, people who I'm sure will end up supporting him for leader, resign at various levels, PPS and ministerial. But we were told, at one point there was a rumor that Shabama Mahmood was going to resign. She didn't resign. We were told there were other members of the cabinet considering they'd resign. We weren't given names. It felt very much like, and we were told Wes didn't want to be the first one to go. It felt like Wes was hoping or pushing, we will probably never know, one or two of the cabinet people to go before him. So he didn't look like he's the guy that stabbed Starmer in the back. I wonder if because of Burnham, he's kind of avoid being seen as the total person who took out Starmer. So avoids that kind of he didn't knife Starmer in the back because he waited. But I wonder if that hesitation for fear of being seen as that person is ultimately kind of is gonna hang around him, that indecision. We saw it with Michael Portillo. He's kind of much loved now in the public conscious for his train work, but politically, people will still remember him for kind of failed leadership bids. And I wonder if Streeting, he doesn't win, which he won't if Burnham wins the by-election, will kind of being known for the man who hesitated when it really mattered. I don't know what your take is on that, as someone
No, no,
who's
I agree with
been
you.
at the sharp end.
There was talk, wasn't there, in January or February? I think the Mandelson stuff was first coming out about whether Wes will go, and there was talk that Wes kind of didn't want to because obviously there are these links between himself and Mandelson. And you now looking back with hindsight, think maybe that was the moment to strike. Burnham had just been told stay in Greater Manchester by Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer was therefore the one time Keir Starmer's actually had some strength within the political
Mm,
party, and it would have been a straight run off between him and Keir. Now it was in Wes and Keir. Now, look, maybe Wes doesn't win that contest, but he has a damn sight better chance of winning that than he does now against potentially Andy Burnham, who, some polls are suggesting that it would be 8-1 or something like that,
yeah,
crazy,
yeah. I mean,
a
the,
landslide
the head
victory.
on head with Burnham is Streeting's getting trashed, right?
So I agree with you. I think it does feel like if Burnham comes back and if Starmer is willing to say to Burnham, go on, put your 81 names on the table, and we end up in some sort of contest, it does feel like I suspect now Wes will just row him behind Burnham and we'll have a two-way fight off. Or if we're led to believe reports that we're reading, that Starmer was not scared of seeing off Streeting. In fact, I agree with you. I think the fact that Wes was, well, the fact Starmer at the cabinet table said, we're not talking about the election results. I'm going to give you
Mm,
a statement. If you want to speak to me after the meeting. Then walked off, made Wes go in the media and basically say, I want to meet with you. Then said to Wes, yeah, Wes, you can have a meeting with me before the King's speech, and gave him only 16 minutes, which suggests Starmer probably
yeah.
just said to him, now you've got to go out there and let's see how ballsy
But
you
I
are.
think, but that meeting was also a Potemkin exercise because if we go back to that, it wasn't very long ago. Wes Starmer basically avoided him on cabinet. One of the classic things, and I've seen people do this in government, is you have to remember Downing Street in the cabinet office retains total control over a cabinet meeting. We did an episode with Michael Gove on how cabinet meetings operate, and the prime minister sat there with the cabinet secretary. There's a few of his spads at the back. There's no ministerial spads from any other office, treasury, whatever. It is all number 10 cabinet staff, and then the the cabinet of politicians. And it is very much down to the prime minister who he goes to. It's not a free for all. It's relatively orchestrated. The agenda's pre-agreed. The permanent secretary will step in to move, to help the prime minister basically. And so it's not the first time I think that someone's gone into a cabinet meeting thinking, "Oh, I'm going to say this." The moment you say it before, the prime minister just won't go to you. And if you try to interrupt, and the prime minister says, "I'm sorry, not now, health secretary, not now, Wes." There's not really much you can do without looking like a total tool in front of all your core colleagues who you are going to need to then win a leadership election or whatever. So it's happened before. It happened to Boris. Boris pre-briefed he was going to demand 350 million, I think it was, for the NHS during Theresa May's time. But they knew it was coming, so no one went to him. And they then machine gunned him in cabinet. So they lined up Philip Hammond and a load of people who and then they briefed it out afterwards. And it was because it was pre-briefed, and they control. the kind of system. And so Wes was then left with a place where, like, I can't just randomly resign on Friday, Saturday because I look like a clown because I waited a week. So he had to have this ridiculous meeting with Keir so he could say, well, I told him yesterday, but he can't overshadow the king, so he can't actually resign. So that was where Wes, that's kind of my point. Wes left himself in the position where the day that you had the state opening of Parliament, he was having this ridiculously pointless meeting with Keir just to say he could resign because he hadn't done it already.
Exactly. And then on top of that, was sat on the front bench during the King's speech. And Kevin Badenoch, I think, did a great job of kind of calling him out and saying, "We all know what you've been doing." And so, and when he was getting shirty, he was all calling out, and you could see that. I think you could see the discomfort from Wes, in
Mm.
particular, from his colleagues who all know at that stage he's going the next day. And then the next day arrives, and everyone thinks, "Oh, well, we'll start the morning straight out the gate, 9:30." It wasn't until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon,
Yeah.
Wes finally drops the letter, and even then, so the problem is the media then start to say throughout the whole morning, is Wes actually going to resign? Is he going to finally
Well,
go?
is he going to then run?
Is he then going to run? And then it comes out that, oh, well, I want a contest of the widest possible, but which basically to me, without knowing Wes's team or Wes's numbers, suggests to me Wes Streeting did not have 81
Did
people.
not have the numbers, no.
And so therefore has done that to appease a few people who have said, we'll let you make sure you get in the final two against Burnham, but you have to let Burnham be part of the final two, as it were. And he's signed his own death warrant. And so, yeah, he is yesterday's man. And his only hope now is he plays nice with Burnham enough that Burnham says, oh, well, look, I want the best talent from across the
Well, his only
party.
hope is reform win Makerfield.
Well, sorry, that's the truth. I mean, maybe when Streeting's going to dress up like Keir Starmer and go around knocking on doors and make it feel
Yeah.
UK.
Wes Streeting is obviously the person in the entire country, more than Nigel Farage, the actual leader of reform, who needs a reform victory at Makerfield. Farage is fine without it. Wes Streeting, he's done. You know, if I was Farage, I'd have some fun with that. I'd be like, I'd invite Wes up for a press conference and say, "You need this more than me, mate."
It would be
I mean,
amazing, wouldn't it? It would be amazing. And it's true. And it's true. And I think you're right. I think Wes is in serious. I think the problem is, therefore, with all these series of events, the hesitation. I mean, like you said to me when before you started recording, James, the resignation, like there's all the chatter about Keir needs to go. Wes does not choose to go within 1 or 2 days, which is, I think, the moment he should have gone after local elections. We then get lots of talk of we might see some cabinet members, including Wes Streeting, going. You said it. It's clear that Wes spent the week trying to basically say to cabinet members, Siobhan Mood, look, let's go together. Peter Carl, you're my mate, let's go together. And all of them have clearly gone, nah, I'll tell the
no.
PM like Shabana allegedly did, and we know they've got friends in our circles who think Shabana's like really
I
robust and
think
stuff.
Shabana is what we call chatty.
Chatty.
And I would
Now,
just suggest she does regularly answer a phone to specific
certain
members of
journalists.
the lobby.
Yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable, James, because we had that big briefing that she had told Keir he's going to set out a timetable, but lo and behold, she's still willing to serve in his cabinet, so she must have some confidence in Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
anyhow,
she's so disappointed in his leadership, she continues to be his home secretary.
exactly. So Wes failed to convince people. He's then clearly sent some of his closest allies. I mean, the fact I think 3 or 4 people from the Department of Health alone resigned, but Jess Phillips, who seems to be one of his closest allies, goes and doesn't just go. She does media afterwards to say he likes Wes. She's seen him in government. He seems he's very effective. Blah blah. And then Wes doesn't do anything. And then we get all the briefings of the Wes people are annoyed and angry, and that's the polite way of putting it, because they've gone over the top. And the man that they thought would follow them has stayed with a darling 100 miles behind them line.
Mm.
Sort of in the old World War One Blackadder analogy. And then
General Melchett.
general leadership. And then, like you say, we then get that weird spectacle of he doesn't get an address here at cabinet. He goes to see him the next morning, doesn't resign because it's the King's speech. So it's Thursday. And yeah, I think Wes now looks like a busted flush. And he's desperately hoping a reform win. And if the reform don't win, he's definitely hoping to pitch himself as a soft left guy in the Labour Party to, even though everyone knows he's a Blairite, in order to probably hope that Andy Burnham takes some pity on him and makes him health secretary again. It's probably the best he can hope for now.
Yeah, I find it's quite interesting, and I think I mean, someone once said to me, your principal skill. I think this is true. Certainly one of the principal skills of politician or anyone involved in politics, especially advisor, needs is judgment. And I think it was just very obviously poor judgment after the locals that Wes and his team clearly hadn't really thought through. I remember speaking to a Labour supporter of Wes kind of midweek and said, what's the plan? He's like, well, I mean, I'm not close to Wes, I don't know. And I was like, well, but you're a Labour person, you support Wes. What do you think the plan is? And they were like, well, I don't really know. And it didn't seem to me like, other than hoping other people resigned and that in the kind of downfall, you could just go as well and run a leadership bid. They didn't have another plan. And I totally agree with you on numbers. Like, I think we would have seen, even if the calculation for Burnham to me, if you're Wes, is um, if you think you can get it done without Burnham, you do it because we've seen the polling, the public's seen the polling. He doesn't stand a chance in a head-to-head against Burnham. It's not even close. Like when you're kind of on 10-20% and your opponent's on 70-80, like a campaign is not going to change that over 6 weeks. It would have to be kind of catastrophic or whatever. So I think you call for Burnham to be allowed in the race because you think it's going to happen anyway, and you don't want to look like you're scared. So you say, "Well, of course I welcome it," when secretly you obviously don't, or you go to exclude him. But I think even if you think he's going to come in, you put the names down to say, "I've got numbers." You need to show some power and strength, and the fact that Burnham hesitated all week uh, was like, even then in the end, like you said, everyone was waiting around all that morning. It wasn't really clear. Still couldn't say, look, I'm going to wait for Burnham, but here's my 81 names. I'm ready. Come and get me. Because that is what in leadership contests the big people do. Now, it doesn't mean you can win. Rishi did this. When he fought Liz, everybody knew from the beginning of that summer, Rishi was going to be in the final two. Now, and no one knew Liz was going to definitely be in the final two. The problem is Liz was always going to win with the members once she did. But at the beginning, Rishi put the numbers on and was just waiting to see who he was against. And if things had gone differently, he could have won that contest. Wes is kind of the Rish of this situation, right? Like he's fighting someone who's telling the party, here's all your dreams, I'm going to give them to you. That's Andy Burnham. And he's trying to say, well, not everything I do is popular like Rishi, but I'm the competent guy. But he hasn't got any strength. I don't really understand what his game plan is.
No, I don't either. And I think, therefore, as I say, he is, like, you're right. He's hoping for a full victory in Makerfield. And if that doesn't happen, then he's hoping. And which, by the way, if a reform victory doesn't happen, if a reform victory in Makerfield does happen, it's basically Streeting versus Starmer, which some polls even suggest Starmer would still win, which
Yeah,
would be remarkable. But even then, let's just say then we are going to be on to does Angela Rayner or Ed Miliband, who are allegedly kind of weighing up if Burnham doesn't come in, do they then enter the fray? And if either of those two come in,
they
he
probably
doesn't
beat
stand a
Wes too.
chance either.
Yeah.
They beat West too. So I think he's
I
just
mean, I do
fighting for
think,
political relevance now.
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he'll probably be the next kind of, David Miliband, that someone who I think be remembered for blowing his chance when he could have had it. Um, but he'll have his fans because all the people on that side of the Labour Party, much like with David, will say, well, we told you we shouldn't have gone for this soft left. We shouldn't have gone for Burnham Rayner, whoever. And, we should have gone for Mr. Sensible, which is Wes. So I'm sure that he'll be more nuanced than just he's terrible. But I do think if he doesn't end up with this, people will basically be like, he really bottled it when he should have gone for it.
And I still personally struggle with Burnham to believe that Makerfield was the seat he wanted. I'll say this as
Oh,
well. There were so
yeah.
many briefings about seats and which ones were coming up, and MP after MP, including, by the way, Josh Simons in Makerfield, denied that they were going to give up their seat, to which Josh then eventually does give up his seat. I really don't believe. I feel like Andy Burnham wasn't in a massive position of strength either at one point. It didn't look like he was going to get a chance to
Mm.
run for a seat. Now, obviously, look, Josh Simons took a bold decision to step aside. There is now this by-election. We've now got Andy Burnham, who's kind of, let's be, in my opinion, some of the media are falling, some elements of the media are falling over, and putting on him what they hope to see from him. But we've already seen Andy Burnham has spent the last 2 years positioning himself as the king of the soft left, and has now ruled out much of the manifesto that he's essentially been pushing over the last, certainly 6, 8 months. So he was very against. He was certainly uncomfortable with the immigration. He was certainly briefing the papers. He was uncomfortable with the immigration reforms. He's now said Parliamentary reforms are 100% staying in place. He said that we should be involved in the bond markets. Now he's going to keep mentioning his fiscal rules. He said that what was it that he in was it November 25? Oh, I hope in my lifetime we'll join the EU. Now he's like, no, I will never put that on the table. Proportional representation. Oh, well, I'll put that maybe in the next manifesto, but I won't say to do it now. I mean, the fact that you've had people like Clive Lewis, James, you pointed out to me, I miss Clive Lewis doing this. Clive Lewis has been Andy Burnham's biggest, she literally saying, I'll offer up my seat for Burnham to come run. And I think now Clive Lewis has given up on him or ditched him already. And so,
Yeah, it's kind of angry with the U-turns. I mean, so on as you know, if we look at Makerfield, you've been up there. I totally agree with you. You know, the media were writing for a week or two. Oh, Andy Burnham's got this safe seat, and I was like, where is it? Which seat is this? Well, what seat is a safe seat? You've just lost Gorton, right? So to me, it was clearly, I think the polite way of calling it is BS. There was never a definite seat, which some journalists should probably ask, like, why was I writing there definitely was one? They should be, they should be saying Burnham allies claim, but they were very much writing he has one. That wasn't true. I agree with you. That was a lie. That was not true. Then Josh, fair play to Josh Simons, who stood down. Whatever anyone says, to give up your job. I don't know how much money Josh has got, but to give up your primary income, your job,
he's a
something that
father of a
you've
young
worked
family, right?
pretty
He's got
damn
a young,
hard to. He's got a young family, something you worked pretty damn hard for your political beliefs. I think that deserves some credit for sure. And Josh decides to stand down. I don't think that's going to be your chosen seat, but it's now binary between the difference between Gorton is we've really seen this tactical vote, perhaps. And it's much more obvious that it's either Reform or Labour in Makerfield than it was, I think, in Gorton. I think that's fair. There's still debates within the Greens. I think there's some Greens that would like to have not run a candidate. There's been discussion on the right about whether the Conservatives and Restore should run a candidate. They all are, and so I'm curious. Like, what's your take? You've been up there. And you let's not forget you went up to Gorton and you saw that on the ground. You spoke to voters on the door. I think if I would say, and tell me if you think I'm saying anything correct, I looked at the overall numbers from the last election, and the left progressive side are over 50%. And that's in the general, and turnout's going to be different. And the kind of centre right is under 50%. So I think and Labour should have, particularly Burnham, should have a machine for that area because he's been fighting in Greater Manchester for a long time. He's got a developed team. But I think, all things being equal, Labour should win that. I think, with Andy Burnham as candidate, with all the assets in their favour, I think it's going to be difficult for Reform. It's going to be harder with Restore. Do you agree with that? Is there anything I've just said that you disagree with? I'm curious how you see this election.
so I went up there in the first week of the campaign. So just as people are starting to realise that they've now got some by-election, because when you're
So
knocking on a few doors, when you're
tell
knocking on
us
a few
about the door
doors,
you knocked on.
yeah, like some fella was saying, I've already voted for reform. And I said, oh no, you've got to vote again. He goes, what do you mean I've got to vote again? Oh, you've got a by-election, your MP's resigned. He went, you what? Well, he said more than that, but I'm not going to say anything. He said, you what? I said, yeah, he's resigned. So Andy Burnham can try and become Prime Minister. He went, are you taking the proverbial?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, was gobsmacked that we were badgering them. And that just after, literally 10 days after having had Reform knocking on the doors, as well as Labour, ahead of the local election. So Look, I've gone there in the early stages of the campaign. This is prior any news stories about any of the candidates and
Mm.
how whether or not those have any in with certain voters. But I will go up later this week, so I'll be able to let you know whether or not I see that sense of the door. What I found interesting was Burnham has got, as you would expect, very strong name recognition. And a lot of people quite liked it. I'm not denying that at all. There was this, I think, this romantic idea of Andy Burnham has been drawn in by parts of the media and by himself. I think he's done a very good job of sort of being seen as a favoured son.
He's a good PR comms person, right?
Really good PR comms. What I was, however, fascinated by was there wasn't anywhere near the love level that I thought there would be. I expect it to be when I was speaking to voters, spending 5, 10 minutes per door trying to convince people to give reform a hearing or indeed vote for reform. And actually, what I found was a lot of the people who were reformed from the local elections, and even some that we hadn't spoken to previously, were solid reform. There wasn't even a hesitation, regardless of Burnham. If I said to them, "Oh, you're still definitely voting reform, even if Andy Burnham's running," they went, "Yeah, yeah, no problem. We'll give you a poster." I mean, we took up 20 window posters. All of them went. People asking for one to put in their window. I think Reform have really learned a lesson from the Greens in Gorton, where they've clearly gone around their supporters and said, "Can we put up garden stakes in your?" And they've targeted the main
Because in
streets, the main
Gorton,
roads.
the Greens were very visual, right? We had
Very visual.
you sent me some videos and some pictures. There was green stuff everywhere.
And I think they've done that deliberately to say to voters in Makerfield, this is not thrown up. This is not a coronation for Andy Burnham. This is a genuine
Mm.
choice, us or Burnham. So I was shocked at the lack of love because you said to me, James, there have clearly been Labour voters going to Reform. There's clearly Labour voters going to the Greens, and some Labour, and probably a bigger chunk of Labour voters sitting at home. Now, I
Mm.
think we both agree Burnham's going to hoover up those who probably went to the Greens previously. He'll get them back because they won't want to risk Reform winning. They know it's too seismic if Reform wins and stops Burnham getting back in. I suspect there'll be a large chunk of Labour voters who sat at home who will happily come out for Burnham because he kind of appeals to that kind of politics.
And the reform
What
stuff will help with those.
And the reforms, but yeah, exactly. The reform stuff will help with those. What I find interesting is, though, you are correct. If you look at the council elections where Labour got in literally that constituency from those elections, Labour were on 22% of the vote share across the 8 wards, and Reform won 50%. So you're asking for a lot of Reform switchers, people to Reform switching back. And I did not get any sense of anywhere near the numbers that he needed to guarantee him a win. So my takeaway was this is very tight and this is very risky for Burnham. The saving grace I will say for Burnham is I did come across a handful, it was a handful of Restore Britain voters. And what I found interesting was that when you spoke to them, they said to you, "We've got to get Labour out." And then when you say to them, "Well, polling shows Reform's the only option to beat Labour," no, I've got to stick with Restore. And so I do think I don't buy some journalists who are suggesting Restore could get into double digits. I find that hard to believe. But I do think Restore can get enough to stop Reform winning. And I think what would be
Mm.
interesting is how Reform handle the squeeze game in order to try and convince those Restore voters to come back to them. And of course, James, you will, as you said to me in private, is the irony of this is Reform are now experiencing the very thing they did to the Conservative Party in the 2024
Yeah,
general
far be
election.
it for me to point out, but there's a few former Conservative MPs when Reform say to us, "Oh, you're just going to hand a victory to Labour." I'm sure there are some former Conservative MPs from the 24 election who have a rather wry smile, let's say, when they hear these attacks on Reform. I mean, look, my own view is it's a free country. If you want to leave the party like you have, you want to run another party, it's not up to me as a Tory to tell you you should or shouldn't do that. I do think it's a bit, what's the word? I mean, certainly hypocritical. It does grate a bit when, Reform are then saying that to Restore. Because I'm like, well, Restore have as much right to run as you do as a Reform person, candidate, whatever, against the Conservatives. Because by and large, I think it's fair to say a lot of people kind of at the kind of activist level and at the candidate level, like yourself, They went to reform because they were frustrated with the Tories. Now, why are most people who are with Restore? Because they were frustrated with reform, right, rightly or wrongly. I don't know the full details. I don't particularly know any. I've never had a conversation detailed enough with Restore, but it strikes me as very, very, very analogous and very similar. And so I think it's a bit rich having this criticism. But I am interested. I'll be honest. I had a conversation with a mutual friend of ours in the West Midlands. I was skeptical reform would do anything significant because we had a lot of wind from them in Gorton and it went nowhere. I can't remember if the guy even got his deposit.
It was Advanced UK in
And that
Gorton,
was
and they didn't
advanced,
get.
sorry, yeah, forgive me. But there was a lot
And
of there was a
Restore
lot
didn't
of
stand at that stage.
reform
Restore didn't
they
stand at that
weren't
stage.
ready. But there was a lot of noise about the advanced person.
Yeah,
They'd done well in the
they were third.
mayoral
They came third in or third or fourth in the mayoral
and
election
they were
against
nowhere.
Burnham, and
Um, and
200
a friend
votes,
of mine
James.
was saying
200 votes.
yeah, and a friend of mine was then said, "Oh, Reform are going to do well," and we've seen Reform do well in Great Yarmouth. But look, it was still sorry, Great Yarmouth. I'm making Sarah Poaching like mistakes now. I'm getting confused. You guys are confused yourselves. Uh, so I,
Oh, James.
but it does seem they might get some level of support. I mean, you don't disagree with that, but I agree with you. There's some people that are kind of starting to talk about above 10%. That to me, that seems a bit fanciful.
Yeah, and look, I haven't come across anywhere near that many on the first session. Obviously, I'm out there twice this week, so I'll get a better picture. But I just haven't heard anything from people who have been going regularly to say that they've come across enough Restore to think, oh wow, like Restore are like seriously challenging. They've certainly seen enough that's gone, Restore could cost us the election, but not enough that Restore are going to hit like significant figures. And I think, look, it'll be an interesting debate then, in terms of the right, it will be that the very thing you said about Canada when we had that discussion not long ago. What does the right do here? Because if the
Mm.
right's going to be now split into three ways instead of two, Andy Burnham, if he does win, if he does take over from Starmer, and in my opinion, I think in yours, James, if he does do the ballsy thing and call an early general election, probably gives him the best opportunity of coming out with the largest party if the right is split in three different directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think as me and you've discussed, I suspect in the end, Burnham would probably bottle that. But I do think it's their best chance. I mean, on just sticking on Makerfield for a second.
I will say this, sorry, James. I will say this. I
Yeah, go
think
on.
Reform certainly learnt a lesson in Makerfield. I think selecting a local candidate was the right move. I think you said it
Yeah,
too before. Selecting a local guy, look, regardless of the media stories about what Rob said in the past on social media, let me just say I'm not here to discuss that. What I will say is that he ran in 2024. He's now ran and got elected as a local councillor. He is a local guy. I think the key thing for by-elections is unless you're Andy Burnham, who is, by the way, local. He was born in a neighbouring seat. He was the MP in a neighbouring seat.
mm,
I think he lived. Sorry, he lived not born. He lived in a neighbouring seat for a lot of his youth. He obviously is the mayor of Greater Manchester. I think. I think it's hard to claim Andy Burnham's not a local guy. It'd be ridiculous to say that. But unless you've got a figure like that, I think that the lesson Reform have definitely learned is going local. And I was quite there was a lot of vocalness from Reform members, both in private WhatsApps but also on Twitter, saying we've got to select the local guy, we've got to select the local guy. And I think that was quite interesting to see that. And those for future, potential by-elections, whether Reform follows that MO or not in terms of going forward again, maybe rather than name. I mean, I know there was a few journalists suggesting Zia Yusuf throw his hat in the ring and make this a by-election on immigration. But I mean, it is interesting to me, and I think you're seeing. I will say this: I think Burnham is allowing it to be too easily looked like he's running for the leadership of the Labour Party rather than running to be the MP for Makerfield.
yeah.
I think Reform today there's this graphic that is allegedly going to be part of Burnham's graphic, which is the Northern
The
Soul
Northern
symbol, where it
Soul, yeah,
says
yeah.
which is like, stick with us for Labour or so, or change Labour for the better or something like that. And to be fair to Reform, they came out, Burnham is interested in running for Labour, Rob is interested in running for Makerfield. And I think the kind of thing, I came across it, there were a lot of people indoors I spoke to who were not happy that they are being used in a political game, as they see it. you know this, James. You've done a lot with focus groups, with polls and stuff, and obviously with voters in terms of elections. People don't. People invest. People hate politicians, and they hate politicians even more if they're seen that they're seen to be using the public as puppets in some sort of game that's trying being played out in Westminster. I do think that's going to make this by-election tighter than it should be for Burnham, because I think people aren't happy at being used as some sort of tool to make Burnham prime minister.
Well, I was just looking up then because the person who best summed this up is former Conservative. You remember them, Gunnis? You used to be friends with us. Former Conservative Chief Whip. I think he was Chris Eaton Harris. Was he deputy or was he chief? He was
Who's chief?
chief,
Who's
wasn't he?
chief? He was a very good chief whip, actually. He was a very good chief.
So he said, "Look, I've campaigned in quite a few by-elections, and he stood in one in 2004. And all campaigns are different, but some lessons. And I'll run through them quickly, but I think they touch on some of the points you've just mentioned. Never underestimate. I'm kind of paraphrasing as well, but do go and look at Chris's tweet thread. Never underestimate the electorate. They'll be disinterested and continue to do that. Those who are going to a vote know exactly what they're doing and the importance of the vote. They use by-elections to send messages to people they don't think are listening to them. Unless it's caused by ill health or death, voters will be peeved to being asked to vote. So your point about that guy you spoke to on the door, there'll be a lot of people, whatever their political views, there's normal people getting on with their lives, who will say, why the bloody hell are we having to have this election after we just voted? Treating a constituency like a fiefdom, something you can bequest to a mate or a fellow party member, is not good. Look at mid-beds in the last parliament, for example. It doesn't matter how many parties stand, no party owns the votes for the electorates, and people want a choice. But within a few days, local people will have decided to put which party. So I think this is the kind of Greens. There will be people who will still vote for the Greens, who won't, who don't like. I speak to people who don't have any interest in tactical voting. Who say, "Well, no, I'm going to vote Green. That's my vote." Um, by-elections are rarely good news for the governing party. I think all parties that are big government would know that. And commentators concentrating rightly on the macro politics campaign, at least one local issue will come to the fore. And I think that's where Burnham's got trouble because he's kind of campaigning on this national thing and the reform can drag it locally. So I went through, there's a couple more, but I thought it was interesting because the dynamics, I think, let me put it like this. It seems very close. And we've seen that in some of the polling and the commentary, and you listen to Labour and they're kind of relatively confident. And if you listen to people on the right, Reform definitely think they have a chance. But I would say it feels like Labour probably win, just scrape it by, because enough of the tactical vote goes their way, Restore splits the right. But I would say if they don't win, it's going to be very obvious why. It's going to be because people are very angry at Labour, people are really pissed off by being told you have to hand this seat to your mate, Andy Burnham, because we've decided he wants to go down to London and be Prime Minister. And they wanted someone local. I don't think it's going to be super complex. What I mean is you can really see through Chris's thread there and things you've just said.
By the way,
It's
James,
got
to
the
add on to
makings
that,
of a defeat for Labour.
it has got the makings of defeat. And I will say this as well. I think I think Labour MPs are going to take all the wrong lessons from this. If Andy
Yeah,
Burnham wins, if Andy Burnham
absolutely.
wins, and he wins, and you have to say it looks like by about 2,000, probably is like a great result, but at best. How many that it's taken Andy Burnham with all the positive kind of press that he's already got and garnered in an area that he already controls and has got a lot of popularity in. If he's only just getting over the line, what does that say about the state of the Labour Party? Because too many of them are going to think, oh, Andy's now our solution to reform. I would go, how many Andy Burnhams do you have in your PLP? Because the truth of the matter is you don't have that many Andy Burnhams in your PLP. And so whilst he might survive, I think if you think you're going to somehow ride out this current dynamic in politics, you're gravely mistaken. And I think that whilst there will be some Labour MPs will be saved, probably under an Andy Burnham premiership over Keir Starmer, I don't think it's in the hundreds that they think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to save 100 plus Labour MPs like they think it
No,
might.
I think the Conservative equivalent is if David Cameron wasn't a peer, a lord, and when Rishi brought him back, he'd stood for a by-election. in the Cotswolds, and there were so many people there that loved David Cameron. David Cameron came back and became an MP, and then decided this is how we are now going to rid the country, because Burnham is not defending the current Labour government record, which we know is wildly unpopular. We've seen it in the local elections as well. They're getting rid of Keir Starmer. He's going to have to take over that. But to think they're going to do this, also the whole situation is not replicable. This is the peak of Burnham. This is the peak of Burnham because he's not hasn't been down to Westminster, back down to Westminster. Have to do all the unpopular stuff that prime ministers do have to do. Um, this is full on tactical voting. You know, it's not going to be many seats where you know for sure it's this party on the left or this party on the right. It won't be that clear quite often. And also, general elections take place in much, bigger kind of bubble, if you like. Everyone knows what's going on, certainly in the last kind of 10 days, 2 weeks. So I totally agree with you. I think this has got all the hallmarks that either way, frankly, even if Reform win this, Reform will be back on top, another Reform MP. Oh, it's amazing. The reality is it will be because that a load of electors said, we're not just going to go for Burnham because you tell us we have to. And they'll flick two fingers up and say, we're going to tell you what we think and vote for Reform. Again, not replicable.
Yeah,
So
agreed.
I think either I think it's I do think I totally agree with you. Westminster being Westminster, they'll draw all the wrong conclusions from this. And the truth is, there's probably not many conclusions you can draw from this by-election for the next election. In fact, the only relevance it has is a catastrophically huge relevance of Burnham wins and he becomes Prime Minister. Much smaller, but still relevant. Reform gets keep the momentum going from the locals and probably use that to push through the summer. Be very good for Reform if they win. But outside of those two things, it's basically irrelevant in my view.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I think that's what's going to be interesting. Labour MPs will get themselves overexcited. I'm sure there'll be some Tory MPs getting excited. You cannot replicate this by-election in a general election. Andy Burnham, as you say, is at his peak now. He has not yet got to Westminster to make decisions about how to govern. And by the way, he might actually have to face out Keir Starmer in a contest, which means he's got to put stuff on the table and make decisions and see who is willing to back him and who isn't. As well as face the questions of, well, if you're not changing the fiscal rules, would you keep Rachel Reeves as Chancellor? If you're not changing immigration, you can keep Shabana Mahmood. And if you're not doing, why are you not keeping them? And we know in the Labour Party, there's also going to be an element of women who are not going to be happy. This is another bloke who's getting to come in and take over the party over someone like Angela Rayner, who was at one point mooted as, a potential challenger. So I think, and as you say, he's going to enter a parliamentary party divided. The soft left will go. You're quite worried now because your victory in the by-election was pitching to basically keep Starmerism alive, but you'll just be a better salesman. The
Yeah.
Starmer lot won't be happy because they'll be going, you caused if you're going to keep our agenda, why did you cause an unnecessary by-election? By the way, we've now got a by-election for the Greater Manchester Mayor to now
Yeah.
oversee, which is now the Reform who've been overruling. Like, so what happens there? And then there's the other group who are going to go, like the Blue Labour lot, who are going to go, well, we don't want any of this stuff. Like, we don't want wealth taxes. We don't want, blah, blah. So you're going to come into a divided party. We've already got Burnham briefing again that, I don't want to whip aggressively. I want to do soft whipping. Well, good luck trying to control the
Also, that
parliamentary
he's
party.
obviously never going to do that. Well, so to finish on, we've got a world exclusive.
Oh,
So
no.
some people will know that Nigel Farage and Reform have been criticised because they want to see a new way of running the NHS, the French way. But one of us, uh, has direct experience of the French health system, don't they, Jonathan?
So, yes, James, I had to go visit. A&E in France.
For anyone
It's a
watching on
plot,
YouTube, Gallus just held up his mildly bandaged finger.
and yes, a vicious attack, a knife attack in the kitchen. It was very vicious.
It was a knife
Um,
attack. Who was holding the knife?
I was James, unfortunately.
Oh,
I attacked myself
what
whilst
could you, what anti-woke, real British, salt of the earth piece of food could you have been cutting at this point?
I was cutting up a baguette for my children, James.
Baguette. Okay.
a very vicious thing, baguettes. Very vicious.
Yeah.
With a very dodgy knife, very wobbly knife, and far more wobbly than I
It's
anticipated.
this
So
continental stuff, Gullis. It's not from It's not steel from Sheffield. Is the
it's
problem?
not steel from Sheffield. It didn't feel like Sheffield steel. So sadly, as I was using the bread knife, yes, I hacked away at my own hand. And after spending 5.5 hours in a small French A&E waiting room when it was 35 degrees inside, I finally got sawtooth and yes, got thrown and picked off. And yeah, so it wasn't as great the French system as maybe some others have told me. So maybe we
Okay.
should pause to think whether the French system's
The jury's
to
out on that
replicate.
one.
The jury's out. The waiting time was replicable of the NHS in
Well,
England
now we'll have
times.
to. Well, hopefully you don't cut yourself chopping an avocado here soon and have to experience
Well,
the
there's no
NHS.
avocados. There's no avocados consumed by me, James. But there are avocados in my house, but not consumed by me. A
Okay.
certain other individual is
That
a
sounds
lover.
a bit like the anti-woke equivalent of I didn't inhale.
Well, I don't have any avocado, James, but I do live with a bit of a lefty, so she is an avocado fan.
Okay.
But anyhow, thank you, James, for letting the world know that I struggle apparently to use my thumbs and fingers to kind of against, sort of I'm still evolving. For those of who love comparing me to Neanderthal, maybe one day I'll learn how these work.
Yeah. Well, on that bombshell, we will leave it there for this week. Uh, if you want to see Jonathan holding up his finger, do check out our YouTube channel where you'll be able to watch him squirm his way through explaining how he performed, in his words, a knife attack on himself while chopping a baguette. Or follow us on our podcast goes out on Spotify and Apple, all the places you get these things, and obviously the Substack you can have the podcast and or the video. And we'll leave it there for this week. And I think we'll see you next week. So it's goodbye from me.
And bon voyage from me.